got home and get more affirmative answers each time. Chad then tells her, not fully sure of the timing for removal, but once her actions verify the differences, I don't want to wait. Someone's dark, the body has to die. Chad doesn't want to wait. On October 9th of 2019, you all heard about an attempted shooting of Tammy Daybell. Earlier in the day, a device associated with Alex Cox traveled down to Sportsman's Warehouse, and you heard how Alex purchased several items. They were all dark in color: a face mask, a knit beanie, frog tog pants, and mittens. And you heard the gloves were a flip mitt. You could pull them back to do things that you needed your fingers for, such as shooting a gun. You heard how later on the 9th, after going to Sportsman's, that device drove up by the Daybell residence, didn't stop, but was in the vicinity, and then left back to Rexburg. What you also heard was that Alex Cox had purchased a burner phone on October 8th of 2019, just the day before. That device was activated on October 9th of 2019. Chad Daybell also had a new burner phone that he'd activated on October 8th of 2019. And you heard talk of the 401 number. That particular phone was only in contact with Lori Vallow and Alex Cox. You heard how around October 9th and in the days after, there were multiple searches conducted on the Homer J. Maximus account. Homer J. Maximus was Alex's account. He had searched drop from 100 yards to 300 yards, 6.5 Grendel. How to prep your AR for the cold. How to load your AR, help load your AR in the cold. How to shoot through a Dodge Dakota. How to shoot through a windshield. You heard that the Daybells owned a Dodge Dakota, and you heard mixed testimony on who drove the car the most. But what was unrefuted is that at a minimum, Tammy did drive that car at times. At a minimum. On October 9th of 2019, there were multiple messages exchanged between Alex, Chad, Zulema, and Lori. The attempted shooting occurred at around 9:15 p.m., and then 4 text messages were exchanged between Alex and Chad between 10:28 and 10:29. Remember, Alex's normal phone or his usual device was left at his apartment, but he had just activated a burner phone. You heard from Zulema that on this same day and around the same time, Lori invited her over to Melanie Pulowski's house in Arizona to conduct a casting on Tammy. And Zulema had told her, we finally have it figured out. We really know how to do this. And you heard from the ladies that what they were taught is if a casting was successful, the body would die or it would naturally expire. They weren't taught that anyone was going to take any action on the body. They were just taught that it would naturally happen. Zulema talked about how that night Lori got a phone call. And she said she had never seen Lori so mad. And when Lori got off the phone, she made a comment along the lines of, that idiot can't do anything right or can't do anything by himself. And when we talk about the timeline on October 9th, you can see there were multiple communications between Chad and Lori and Alex and Chad. The other thing that you notice on here is this incident is reported at 9:41, originally by Joe Murray. And you heard from Joe Murray, he's Tammy's son-in-law. You see that the Fremont County Sheriff's Office was dispatched at 9:45 p.m. And then at 9:49, Tammy made a call into the non-emergency line in Fremont County. 9:52 is when the Fremont County deputy arrives on scene. And why does that matter? Tammy had done a search, or someone using Tammy's account had done a search for first an airsoft gun and second a paintball gun. But when you look at the time of the search, 3:29, if you do the calculations for UTC, it ends up at either close to 8:30 p.m. or close to 9:30 p.m. Attempted shooting happens around 9:15. So around 9:30, Tammy is conducting those searches. Well, why does that matter? Deputy Cannon's not on scene. Deputy Cannon doesn't get to the scene until 9:52. He can't be there when Tammy's looking at anything. He can't be there to know who did the Google searches. And Deputy Cannon talked to you about the fact that he was looking for casings. Why was he looking for casings? Because he didn't know. He thought it could be a rifle. Nobody knew if this was a paintball gun or a rifle. What else we know from Deputy Cannon's report is towards the bottom, when he talked to Joe Murray told him he was cutting wood on his property when he heard Tamara scream. Joe Murray heard his mother-in-law scream. He called 911. Later, Tammy called dispatch. We know Tammy sent an email to her son, Mark, and we reviewed that email several times. We know Tammy called into dispatch, and we reviewed that call several times. Tammy at times refers to it as a paintball gun, but remember how she describes it. He was holding it like it was a rifle. He was pointing it at me. He was pulling the trigger. He was shooting at me. This wasn't someone just pointing a gun. This wasn't a prank. The person was pulling the trigger. She says it was dark. She describes the person dressed all in black, and she describes the person wearing a face mask. Remember, Alex Cox had purchased a face mask earlier that day at Sportsman's Warehouse. Alex Cox had purchased black or dark clothing earlier that day at Sportsman's Warehouse. Alex Cox had a 6.5 Grendel. Alex Cox was searching about shooting a 6.5 Grendel in the dark, or in the cold. Why? You heard from Detective Kaikamanu that it was 26 degrees on October 9th of 2019. You heard in Tammy's own words, he stood there pulling the trigger, shooting. The gun didn't go off or the gun misfired. Alex is searching about how to shoot an AR in the cold. You heard from both Investigator Edwards and Detective Kaikamanu about their training with paintball guns and their training with ARs. You heard from them how the scope on an AR could be mistaken for a hopper on a paintball gun. You further heard when it's dark, it's even harder to tell. You further heard that if the gun is pointed at you, it's going to be that much harder to tell. You also heard that Tammy wasn't familiar with guns. Her own kids, Emma and Garth, told you. They've never seen Tammy with a paintball gun. They've never seen Tammy with an assault rifle. But what do you know? Tammy was scared. Tammy sent a Facebook message warning people. In her email to Mark, Tammy said, "The scared part came later when I realized what could have happened. I didn't want to go out the next night alone after dark." Tammy had no idea someone wanted her dead, but she was still scared by that incident. And we talked about how Alex had done some additional searches, or that account had. about how to shoot with the AR, and you heard how Alex was going to the shooting range in Fremont County from Detective Kaikamanu, and that was before and after this attempted shooting of Tammy. And you heard from Agent Wright how he was going to the shooting range in Rexburg, and he was practicing to shoot long distances. And you heard from Investigator Edwards. He talked to you about how he looked at that gun. He looked at that Grendel 6.5, and it had a pin that was loose. And he explained to you about how if that pin had come loose, that could cause the gun to misfire. Alex didn't know why the gun misfired. That's why he was looking at shooting an AR in the cold. Instead, we do not know of any other attempted shootings of Tammy Daybell. Instead, what we know is that on October 19th of 2019, just before 6 a.m., Chad Daybell and Garth Daybell made a call to 911 to report Tammy's death. Remember how Garth described her. She's stiff and cold. Remember what Chad said. She's clearly dead.
Okay. Yeah, she's not even gross.
A little over 24 hours from reporting his wife's death, Chad messages Lori, "I know exactly how you feel. I'm feeling sad, but it isn't for the reason everyone thinks." His wife had been reported dead a little over 24 hours before he sent that to Lori. You heard the description of Tammy. Stiff and cold, clearly dead. And yet, Garth and Chad say they put her back on the bed. Garth says he hears a thud and his dad calls for him. However, Garth and Chad were consistent. Tammy didn't fall out of bed. Where's the thud? They both describe the top part of Tammy falling out of the bed and her legs being tangled in the sheets. And you heard from the coroner that when she arrived on scene, there was this rag in the bedroom. And she took the rag and she wiped the foam or the sputum that was coming out of Tammy's mouth. But what you also heard from her was it was a rag Chad had already been using. Tammy's clearly dead. The body's been moved. The foam's been wiped. And if we back up to October 18th of 2019, we know Lori was in Hawaii. She was in Hawaii with Melanie Pulowski. You heard how Alex took her down to Las Vegas to drop Lori off at the airport shortly before that. But what's more telling than who was in Hawaii is who wasn't. Melanie Pulowski told you Alex Cox was supposed to go with them on that trip. Alex didn't go because Chad needed help with something. Tammy was possessed. Her death percentage was low. Alex believed Chad 100%.